one of the main things that you used to, in terms of being a presidential whisperer, it was about China. And there are a few people around as I think hawkish as you on China, or as worried about the eventual way that the planet looks in 2025 or 2030 if China were to continue along its current path. Is anything surprising you about this latest development?
You know, I'd like to thank Becky for the introduction, Joe, but the reality is this is to the core of what Donald Trump believes and understands. He's been the architect of this from day one. And I think when you go back through the pattern of how this is developed, his consistency has been pretty remarkable. Not just what he said over many years, what he said on the campaign trail. You heard last night the response of working class and middle class people at his rally up in the Midwest. But if you look at from Mar-a-Lago all the way through yesterday, it's very consistent what the president's laid out of what has to happen. And I think it's pretty remarkable how the Chinese have tried to, the CCP, and this is what it's about, the senior leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, have tried to game the system once again, and they're used to American leaders, whether business leaders, finance leaders, or political leaders buckling under this false, this false concept of engagement. Donald Trump has been very consistent. I think coming from Buenos Aires and Osaka, he looked at two basic things they could do and committed to. And this was purchases of agricultural products and the stopping of fentanyl, which is killing, 28,000 to 50,000 people a year. And they couldn't even do that. And I think yesterday was a very important day in American economic history because on September 1st, we're going to cross a psychological barrier. Every good that comes to the United States from China is going to have a tariff on it. And I think that's yesterday was a very big day. I think President Trump's given the Chinese Communist Party enough time to respond to this fundamental restructuring of their economy that he's been working on, and they've got a leader now who's not going to back down. I think
you're on record saying that the most important thing a president, and in this case President Donald Trump, can do is to have this, for lack of a better term, confrontation with China. This is the most important thing in his, if it's one term, two term, or whatever, this is what he's going to be remembered for. And you say you're watching history unfold real time.
Yeah, I've been talking on the show to you guys, for the last 4, 5, 6 months from around the world, and I think it's been pretty straightforward. This is the defining event of our time, and the relationship between China and the United States is going to set, I think, the framework for how we go forward as a world economy for the next 25, 30, 40, 50 years. That's why this is history in real time. And I think what's quite remarkable is the foreign policy establishment, all the elites, all the geniuses that got us into this situation. Remember, we've deindustrialized this country because of this. This is Wall Street and the corporate leaders. This is the IR department of all these investment banks, Goldman Sachs, all the investment banks, and the giant corporations that got us into this situation, the American elite. This is the fundamental reason Donald Trump's president of the United States. This is the return of American greatness. This is bringing our manufacturing base back. It's not easy.
Steve,
but that's why I think he's unwavering in this.
Steve, speak to the political calculus here, because we've discussed sort of what it means that there's an election now coming up, and how the Chinese are viewing that election, how the Trump administration is viewing that election, the idea of fighting this fight throughout the election, what the tariffs ultimately mean to jobs in the United States. So if we actually do see a fall in jobs, does that actually impact the president? To the extent that you would be advising the president or thinking about all of these issues, how do you see it?
I think clearly the Chinese are hoping for a Democratic administration. I don't think there's any doubt. Even with, Jim Cramer brought up the concept of the economic patriotism of Elizabeth Warren the other day, her paper. But if you look at Biden, if you look at Harris, these are very weak on China. I think President Trump understands that the China situation is going to frame 2020, particularly because it's about bringing back our manufacturing base. One thing people miss, though, I think, is the concept that Xi, just because he's consolidated power after the 18th Party Congress, he's really voted on every day by the powers that be on all these factions in China. And he's now put hardliners in charge. Li He, the lead negotiator, the reformer, has essentially been layered by their Commerce Secretary, Zhang, who's a hardliner. And I think that's why you've seen these negotiations crab sideways. But I think President Trump understands, not just for the immediate politics of 2020, but for the direction of the nation and the direction of free market capitalism in the industrial democracies for the next 10 or 20 years. And this is why the foreign policy elites who mock this guy don't get the fact that he understands deeply what the geostrategic struggle is and how important this is. And I think this is going to power him to 2020 because people see that this is what leadership is. This is what presidential leadership is.